Welcome to the Softland Central podcast, your home for market entry knowledge and resources. Softland Central is brought to you by Softland Partners, an online marketplace to help you find best fit resources for your market entry. Find them at softlandpartners.com. Hi, and welcome to Softland Central, the home for market entry. And today we're going to talk about U.S. expansion, how to hit the ground running. It's just a great pleasure to welcome Joanne Farquharson from Foothold America. Welcome, Joanne.
Hi there, Bill. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be talking about, well, as you see, Foothold America. I'm very excited and bright red about that.
And I apologize, I just mispronounced your last name. It's Farquharson. Is that correct?
Well, it's Farquharson. But you've gotten closer than most people, so kudos to you.
Well, since we're recording, I want to get it right so people don't know your correct name. So we want to talk about expanding to the U.S. and obviously you're based in Europe and you're working with lots of companies in this regard, and we see it on the receiving end. So many challenges that companies have, not just coming from Europe, but coming from sort of all over the world into the U.S. market. But when you think of the things that really challenge companies, I'm sure there are some buckets that there's sort of major areas. What are the sort of big buckets of things that challenge companies entering the U.S. market?
Great question. There are two big buckets that come to mind. One is just the administration and bureaucracy that has to be managed over 50 states. And it's overwhelming to companies, and they often think of the US as 50 different countries. And when you've lived there and grown up there and worked there, you know that there's a lot of similarities among states, but there are enough administrative bureaucratic differences where you can accidentally get yourself in trouble. So for sure, managing all the administration, the taxes, the filings, and sort of a carry-on from that is the real possibility of making mistakes and having to deal with litigation. The U.S. is very litigious, and for companies expanding to the U.S., that often includes employees, which brings me to the second bucket, which is all of the regulations that are attached to people. So you expand to the U.S., you are looking for a U.S. workforce, and you know that you have to pay them properly and do all the taxes. But there's just a lot to it. A little bit, to get a little bit specific, when it comes to employment in the U.S., it's you'll hear the term at will, and so that means an employer can terminate an employee with very little notice, and that's very foreign to many other countries where there are lengthy notice periods and things like that. And so they can come to the U.S. with the perception that I can just replace an employee if I need to. And they can also get in trouble with that because of heavy duty discrimination laws. So yes, you can terminate someone, but it can't be for a discriminatory reason. And so there's some landmines there when it comes to people. So bucket number one, administration, bureaucracy. Bucket number two, people.
And I would imagine with people too, particularly companies coming in from Europe, where healthcare in many countries is socialized and public. Here, navigating even just the healthcare system from an employee standpoint is massive.
Absolutely. That's so my background in the US was in the employee benefits insurance business. And when I moved from the United States to the UK, I thought, well, when am I ever going to use that kind of thing again? It's all insurance based and, US based. And here I am talking about that kind of thing every day with clients because If there is a third bucket that I'd mention, it would be the sticker shock that people experience when they see the salaries in the US and the cost of health insurance. They're blown away by that. And they're, many businesses don't have to offer health insurance depending on their size. But what international companies, international business owners have to wrap their head around is, well, if I don't have to offer it, but the reality is you will have a very difficult time attracting and retaining employees if you don't. So going through the details of a budget, the cost of employees is a big part of that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. Yeah, and certainly it's such a competitive recruiting uh, market. Yeah, that needing to be competitive in terms of benefits and so on is probably critically important.
Absolutely. And depending on the industry.
Yeah.
So we are headquartered in Boston. Our background, our foothold was born out of a life science consultancy firm. And so in that area and in that industry, oh my gosh, yeah, you have to have the very best. And that's part of the conversation we have with people as well, because sometimes people, business owners outside of the country will think, well, we're expanding to the US. It's like, well, okay, what does that mean? Well, East Coast, maybe. And then it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? And well, Boston and New York. So it's sort of the obvious ones are what comes to mind first, but there's so much else out there. Boston is so competitive for the life science industry. It's so saturated. And we talk with clients about considering other areas. So Raleigh, North Carolina has wonderful talent that you wouldn't necessarily expect with a much lower salary ranges. Same thing on the West Coast, where everyone thinks I've got to be in San Francisco, I've got to be in the Bay Area. And there's Irvine, California, where the salaries are lower and wonderful schools. And actually, we're writing a series of blog articles right now about the places aren't the hubs, the emerging hubs, and why there's value there.
And you're really segueing us very well into an area we wanted to get into, which is really around. So what do we do now that we know some of the challenges, and thinking about, and you kind of start down the area of staffing and site selection. But what are, in terms of overcoming these challenges, what are some of the best practices?
Good question. So one of the things I love about the work that I do is getting to work with entrepreneurs in all over the world and in various industries. And I'm fascinated by the different decision-making processes that people go through. So sometimes we'll get a call because a business has identified a candidate in the US and they want them, and they now need to figure out how to pay them and get benefits. And then other times there's a very methodical, we've done research on various cities and the tax incentives that are available there, and there is very formal plan. So, and I haven't seen that one or the other, on the continuum brings more success than the other. It sort of depends on the style of the entrepreneur. But I think one of the things that I see when companies are successful is they decide when they want to DIY, do it themselves, and when they need trusted partners, and they have a good sense of what they can do, what makes sense from in terms of the investment of time they have to make. So for example, if you lived in the US your whole life and you decided you want to start a business, you'd probably go it your own. You'd go online and you'd register a business and you'd be okay because you know a lot about the country. You have people around you can ask, so you'd probably do it. it's not rocket science to do that. However, the successful business person in another country is saying, I can figure that out. Of course I can. I just have to Google things and read. But is that worth it to spend the time doing those kinds of things? So for me, when I watch companies where they go, we need tax, we need legal, we need immigration, we need employee and HR, trusted partners, and we can do this, 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 and this ourselves. So another example of what I've seen is businesses overseas doing a lot of the recruiting themselves. So, and certainly there are times when you want an agency, you want them in the US, and you want, if you have a specialized position you need to fill, you absolutely want to rely on those folks. But I've seen a lot of confidence and success in business owners saying, you know, I can use the tools that are worldwide, like LinkedIn, and I can find these people, and we want them to understand us. And so it's really a matter of knowing what things you're good at, and knowing that there are things you just don't know, and being okay with that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. As you were talking, I was thinking about kind of our own situation. You know, I live in the U.S. and I would never think about forming a company without an attorney. I mean, as you said, it's probably not that hard of a process, and the information is undoubtedly on Google, but it's one of those things that it number one, administratively, it's not that expensive to get somebody to help you form an LLC and register with the state and do all that. And it's just something you don't have to invest time in, because the access to good professionals is there. But yeah, no, but you're absolutely right. We all sort of pick and choose which things we want to in-house versus outsource and all that.
You actually make a good point, because it's that's a good example of, if I'm going to set something up, and I would go to an attorney, and that part maybe is obvious. What becomes interesting along those same lines is to think of it after the setup. So yes, you've got your entity set up, but as you go along, it's not just I've set it up and now it runs on its own. It's constantly being on top of the regulatory changes and things like that, and just becoming more mature in your understanding of the country, and that can take years. But again, ultimately, you are going to make decisions about what's coming in-house and what isn't. Is finance ever going to be in the US, or is it always going to be at your home country? Things like that. So.
Yeah, I think of, for example, here, like payroll services are almost ubiquitous. Almost no company does their own payroll, because you have employees in every state. You have to comply with those state regulatory issues, and they are hugely dynamic. And so, yeah, I think it's so much more efficient to go through someone who has to be on top of that, and there's an efficiency for them in staying up with the regulatory issues in each state.
I had advice from an accountant probably 25 years ago when I started my first business. And she said to me, the minute you hire your first employee, get a payroll company. And again, at that time, I was thinking, well, wait, how difficult is it? I sort of understand these things. I'm in the employee benefits arena. I'm smart, I can figure it out. And she just said, it's so not worth it, because if you miss one deadline for your withholding, the fines are just ridiculous. And so that was such good advice. Yeah.
That's really cool. So, so the idea of in-housing, out-housing, and so let's talk a little bit about the attributes that you see in companies. When you sort of reflect on the work you've done in the space to help companies enter the U.S. market. There's, I'm sure, a continuum of companies that have succeeded exceptionally well, and maybe others that they left some opportunity on the bench. So when you think about the companies that really succeeded in the process, what are the attributes, whether it's of the people of the the executives or the companies themselves, that you think were really key in that success?
That's a great question, and given what we've gone through and are still going through with the pandemic, having to work virtually is something that is brand new for a lot of people. So with Foothold, our team is all remote, and we've been like that, and that's how we work. And now there are many people thinking along those lines, having to get used to working with a remote workforce. But prior to that, our clients that were just getting a foothold in the US would have one employee, and that one employee was their only one in the US, and they were not necessarily connected with the home country. So, you've got 5 to 8, 10 hours difference time zone wise, but very often that person can feel like they're not connected. And so the businesses that are successful are the ones that embrace, even if it's just 1 or 2 employees, and make them feel a part of the team. So a colleague shared an article with me recently, and the data point was that 70% of US employees leave their positions because of the lack of professional growth, which surprised me. And when I think about some of our clients, that not the ones that are scaling, that are going to have dozens of employees, in their first year or so, but the smaller ones that are just looking for a business development person to generate business to send back to the home country, they don't necessarily have room for advancement unless they move to the home country. So while they may have the autonomy that they like, and they're working from home, and they may be very invested in the company, if they're the one and only, and they're always going to be the one and only, it becomes difficult for international companies to retain them. So they have to be part of the team, and just become a very engaged employee. So for sure, when clients do that, that's when we see success.
Yeah, what's the saying, that the tyranny of distance? Yeah, it can be such a challenge. But I know I can see that, and we certainly have seen that with some of our clients as well. And so thinking about these companies that are looking to build the U.S. team, and even if it's a team of one, but that sense of inclusion, what might a company do to do that? How do they take that from sort of theory to reality?
Yeah, for sure. So it's essentially it's bringing whatever the company's culture is to this one person or to the team in the US. And it's important to recognize the cultural differences in terms of, work ethic and days off. I mean, I've been I've been in Europe for long enough to know lots of vacation time is a brilliant thing, and I still have to kind of remind the U.S. folks, take some time, take some time. You don't just have to add one day after the 4th of July to to have your vacation, but take 2 good weeks. And so it's really trying to mesh cultures. So whatever your company culture is in your home country, make sure that that gets impressed upon that one person, and again that they feel engaged. And the other is to recognize the differences in the culture from the country perspective, and just try not to fit people into different boxes. So one of the things that is an example of that, we have many IT companies that have wonderful products. They've gotten incredible funding, and now there's a race to scale in the US. And it's a very exciting time for them. It's hugely pressure filled, and then we become, part of the helping on the people side of things, and not recruiting, but how do you from afar drive that team
Mm.
to scale the way you want, but also protect yourself, because even though it's at will employment, you have to make sure that you do it right.
Mm.
And the ones that are successful are the ones that think long and hard, spend the time to identify exactly what they want from this person, because you can get incredible performance from people in the US. You just have to let them know what your expectations are, what are the targets, things like that. And when companies really investigate what it is they want and need and can communicate that, then they're going to keep those employees and not just run through them.
Right. No, that's great. It's funny. As we've been talking, and we've been talking about a lot of things that are challenging companies, and we almost kind of sets up maybe this might not be worth it. And I guess the and I'd love your thoughts on this. Our what we tend to see with our successful clients is that within about 3 years of U.S. market entry, the U.S. is bigger than the rest of the company, and and so I don't want to close on sort of the hard part. There is some really neat successes ahead, and is it worth it? But do you have some thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. So sometimes it's the success in the US in the form of sales that leads people to do what they're calling expansion. So they're
Hmm.
already in the States, but they're not in the States.
Yeah.
And it's that success that says, wow, we really need to get some boots on the ground. We need to be in the right time zones to take care of our clients and to grow this business. We've had proof of concept from afar, so now it feels safe to do that. So absolutely, that happens a lot. Which is wonderful. So
Mm.
I mentioned to you earlier that Foothold um, grew out of a life science consulting firm. So for our history, a London-based consulting firm, international consulting firm, looked over to the US, looked to Boston, and said, let's send one of our partners over there and grow in the US. They went through their pains, the growing pains, which is how Foothold evolved, because we thought, oh, okay, we figured it out. Now let's help others. So
Mm.
that's Foothold's story. But within 3-4 years, the U.S. was outpacing. The office was bigger, so it happens. It happens a lot.
Yeah. No, it's really dramatic when you see that change.
Yes.
So let's talk about Foothold, maybe if you could give us a sense of what types of companies you work with particularly, and what services you provide would be great.
Sure, sure. So since I mentioned our history,
Mm.
in the first few years when Foothold was still a service of the consulting company, um, we were only helping other life science companies from the UK. And it was just a tight little, you're coming to Boston? Okay, we can help. And then it was sort of our own proof of concept where we thought there is such a need for this. And we now, have figured this out, and we've got companies, clients all over the world. And life science is no longer the leading industry um, for the services that we provide. So right now we've got mostly IT, probably, well, definitely more than half of the clients that we serve are in some sort of IT, um, and Sorry,
Oh,
just
no
got
problem.
distracted.
No, no,
So,
no. And I'd asked also, so with the companies you serve, what are what is it that you provide?
thank you.
Hmm?
So, so we have a continuum of services. So we will help clients who are looking for their first employee. They're not sure if they're committed to the US, so they don't want an entity, and it's a co-employment
Hmm.
model. And I think one of our strengths is we will handhold the client, and many of our clients have only one employee, and it can be difficult for businesses like that to um, to find a company that will help them, that they're sort of, oh, when you have 5 employees, come and talk to us. So we focus on the small businesses from that very first step. And then our service evolves as our clients evolve, where we will, when they're committed, set up that entity, help them hire the employees directly, get their own employee benefits, and build a bit of an infrastructure in the US, where our role is the conduit between the home country's HR, and we've got the people on the ground there. So they can grow to quite a big size without having to say, well, now in the US we have HR just like we do there. So we can help them build it, but not necessarily as much as they would have that they have in their home country. So,
Mm. Oh, that's great. So essentially helping you're sort of that very early stage company in terms of entry to get that first employee on board. It sounds like a fair amount of risk mitigation as well, because they're not having to maybe deal with the direct employment at first. They can test, various markets
absolutely,
and it maybe
absolutely.
expand more
No
quickly.
long-term contracts. That's critical. So
Yeah.
it's a great service from the perspective of the barriers to entry and exit are very low for the
Mm.
client, and so and most are successful. So every
Mm.
now and then there's this a candidate selection that doesn't quite work out, and
Mm.
sometimes that's, you go, okay, well, we tried it once,
Mm.
and then they'll shy back a bit. So that that does happen, but that's the beauty of that foothold kind of product, where it's okay.
Mm.
It is okay if this doesn't work out, and this is the way to start, so that you don't get into the whole entity and offices and all of that stuff when you're
Right.
not sure. And then when you are sure, then you have someone already here for you to dig a little deeper, let your roots grow a bit.
Sure. Yeah, I suppose why reduce your flexibility is yeah by having whether it's long-term space contracts or long-term employee contracts and so on. Yeah, it's
Absolutely. And we do very often say to clients to think in 5-year chunks. So
mm,
even if you don't know if the US is going to work for you, in an ideal world, what does it look like for you in
mhm,
in the US in 5 years? And you can start to map out a process that goes beyond just let's test the waters. Because you know, if you think it and you believe it and you build it, they will come.
yeah. No. Well, and I think aligning yourself with people who have been there before and know the path, I think is such a meaningful strategy for companies as well. It doesn't have to be uncharted water.
Exactly. And
Uh,
once you find one um, company that can help you, that can spread so easily. So,
mm, mm,
we'll refer to a tax client, or immigration folks refer to us, and
mm.
it just takes, you just find a little grouping, and then you have what you need to focus on the scaling that you want to do, or whatever your business objectives are in the US.
Yeah, essentially the ability then to focus sort of on the core business as opposed to all the peripheral stuff, I guess. Is that, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, Bill. I couldn't have said it better.
Well, I'm just reflecting, well, Joanne, this has been fantastic. I think there's a lot of great nuggets here. Are there any sort of summary thoughts that you have in terms of, for companies who are looking to explore and enter the U.S. market?
Well, I think there is a place for every kind of risk appetite out there. So going to the US, going outside of your home country doesn't have to mean you have to be a certain type of entrepreneur or you won't be successful. You can be a very risk averse person and still be very successful. So you be you and you do the same things that you've done to be successful in your home country, and it's okay to either jump in and scale or to take it tiny steps at a time. There's not one template for you to be successful.
That's so cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon, and also for really sharing these great sage pieces of wisdom.
Thanks, Bill. It's been my pleasure.
Super. Thanks, everybody. And make sure to like and subscribe and do all those fun things so that you can stay in the loop on all of our upcoming podcasts and webinars. Thank you.